My name is Caroline. I was 32 when that very call rang, the one that turned my entire inner world upside down. The phone vibrated on the kitchen table, and I, absent-mindedly stirring my coffee with a spoon, didn't even glance at the screen until I heard a voice I couldn't mistake for any other. "Caroline, dear, it's Aunt Linda," she said, and there was something unsettling in her voice, as if a premonition lurked beneath the surface of her words, a premonition that made me want to cover my ears. "I need to talk to you about something." She sighed, as if gathering her courage. "Last night I had a very disturbing dream about your parents," she said quietly. "I know you haven't spoken in a while, but maybe you should try to fix things." I was silent for a long time, staring at the pattern of steam rising from my cup. The words stuck somewhere in my throat. My aunt was the only one who didn't turn away from me when, 10 years ago, the entire family seemed to erase my name from their lives. She knew why I left, knew every detail of that night, every word that was seared into my memory like a burn. "Aunt Linda," I finally said, "I'm not sure this is a good idea." She answered with a gentle insistence that always had something maternal about it. "Just think about it, dear, Mother's Day is coming soon, maybe now is the time." I knew I didn't want to do this, to return to a place where I was not welcome, but for her sake, I could at least promise myself to think about it. She was the only person who continued to believe that something could still be fixed in our family, and if it would help her sleep better, maybe it was worth a try. But to understand why those words caused such a storm in me, I have to go back 10 years, to where it all began. I was 22. I had just graduated from college with a degree in investment management and started my first job, modest but proud. I paid my own rent, bought my own food, decided my own bedtime and my own dreams. Everything seemed possible until the news of my grandmother's death arrived. She was my father's mother and perhaps the only person who could look at me with warmth, even when everything around me was crumbling. After the funeral, the lawyer read the will, and at that moment, everything seemed surprisingly fair. She left the house to her 3 sons, and the money, $50,000 to each of her 6 grandchildren. I remember thinking then that it wasn't just money, it was like a sign that she believed that each of us has our own path, and it's worth betting on. 3 days later, my mother called. "Come to dinner tonight," she said in that same tone, devoid of any request or warmth, only a familiar command. "The whole family will be here." I came. The house was the same, but it felt strange. Marcus and Diana, my older brother and sister, were already seated at the table. Their faces were serious, as if they were about to attend court. Mom nodded to the chair opposite. "Sit down, Caroline, we have something important to discuss." I looked at her questioningly. "Your sister is getting married in 4 months," she said, and I smiled automatically. "Congratulations, Diana." Diana didn't smile back, her lips were pressed into a thin line. "Thank you," she said dryly, "but we have a problem, the wedding will be expensive." Mom intervened almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting for this pretext. "We think you should give your money to Diana, the money you inherited, it would be the right thing to do." I froze, the words died in the air. "What?" I choked out. "She needs a beautiful wedding," Mom continued calmly. 50,000 will make it perfect." I felt my stomach clench. "But it's my money," I said, "Grandma left it to me." Dad slammed his fist on the table. "Don't be selfish. Family helps family." I looked around. "But Marcus got 50, too, and the cousins, too, why should I be the only one giving mine?" Mom looked at me with the cold confidence that always made me want to shrink. "Because Diana needs it more than you do." I stood up. "No, I won't give it to her, it's my money, and I'm going to use it for my future." Diana's face flushed with anger. "You're a greedy bitch," she snapped. "If you don't give me this money, you can forget about my wedding." "Fine," I replied, feeling my throat tighten, "I'm not going to give in to blackmail." That's when my father jumped up, his face turning purple. "Get out of this house," he shouted, "you're selfish and a disgrace to the family. We want nothing to do with you anymore, from now on, you're nothing to us." I stood there, unable to believe it was actually happening. Every word seemed to fall on me like stones. I looked at them, my mother, my father, my brother, my sister, and knew it was the end. I knew my parents had always treated me differently than my siblings. but what happened then surpassed even my most painful expectations. It felt as if I suddenly found myself not a daughter, but a stranger, accidentally wandering into a house where she was not welcome, when my father shouted at me to get out, and my mother, with icy calm in her voice, added, "Don't come back here until you're ready to do the right thing." I stood there, numb, listening to the words shatter inside me like sharp shards. I don't remember leaving the house. I think I simply turned and walked away, leaving behind their loud voices and the smell of roasting meat that permeated the walls of the kitchen where I grew up. I walked down the street, feeling anger mingle with resentment, my insides pulsing with injustice, but I knew I wouldn't give in, wouldn't let them dictate what I should do with what my grandmother left me. They said it in their anger. I thought they'd cool down, realize they'd gone too far, but they were serious. Days passed, then weeks, and then silence, not a call, not a text. I kept waiting for my mother to call, to say something like, "Well, stop being stubborn, come over for dinner," but the phone never rang. I tried. I sent them a couple of short messages, "Happy birthdays, happy holidays, simply how are you?" Not a single one responded, not my father, not my mother, not Marcus, not Diana. Over time, I realized that for them, I seemed dead, even though I was breathing, working, eating, laughing. After a few months of this deafening silence, I stopped trying. It hurt, but there was no point in knocking on a door where you were no longer welcome. Instead, I focused on myself. I still had that 50,000, the money they blamed for our breakup, and I decided it wouldn't go to waste. I invested it in a small medical startup I'd heard about through a colleague. No one knew about it back then, but I read everything I could, talked to the team, and sensed there was something genuine behind the project. The risk was enormous, but I had nothing but faith, and I bet on it. 5 years passed, the company grew, then went public, and one morning I saw numbers on the screen that made my head spin. My 50,000 had become 2 million. I sat on the floor of my tiny apartment, laughing and crying at the same time, because my grandmother probably knew what she was doing when she left me that money. But I didn't stop. I took some of the profits and invested them in another company, at the time, still unknown, working with neural networks and artificial intelligence. I saw the world changing, and I wanted to be a part of it. Meanwhile, I continued going to the office, analyzing other people's investments, keeping my name out of the spotlight, and quietly building my own fortune. Another 5 years passed. I had over $10 million in my accounts. I had bought myself time to choose who to talk to, how to live, where to go. But no one in my family knew about this. They completely shut me out, as if I'd once crossed a line of no return. And maybe that's why I was so terrified when Aunt Linda called. 2 weeks remained until Mother's Day. I thought for a long time, waited, told myself it wasn't worth it, that everything had already been said, but something inside me, maybe a remnant of the same girl who once waited for a call from my mother, whispered, "Try again." I bought a large bouquet of roses, white, just like my grandmother liked them, and drove to a house I hadn't seen in 10 years. When I pulled up to the familiar entrance, my heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The house looked exactly the same blinds, the same porch, the same potted plant, faded by the sun. I knocked. The door opened almost immediately. Mom stood before me, and her eyes reflected everything: surprise, confusion, and then irritation, cold and sharp as a blade. "What are you doing here?" she asked, and her voice was so foreign, as if we had never been family. "Hi, Mom," I said quietly, "Happy Mother's Day." I handed her the bouquet, and for a second I thought she'd take it, but no, she didn't even move. Behind her, I saw my father, Marcus, and Diana, all sitting at the table, as if it were a normal family dinner. Next to Diana was a man, probably her husband, and 2 children I'd never seen, my nephews, I thought, and my heart sank. "May I come in?" I asked, stepping forward. Mom raised her hand, as if erecting an invisible barrier. "You're not welcome here, just accept it and leave." The door slammed right in my face. I stood on the porch, clutching the bouquet, and felt my knees buckle. The petals trembled in the wind, and I trembled with them. I stood there for a few minutes, unsure of where to go, then slowly walked down the steps, laid the flowers by the door, and walked to the car. At home, I called Aunt Linda. "So, how did it go, dear?" she asked anxiously. I exhaled. She didn't even let me in. "Oh, Dear, Aunt Linda said, I'm so sorry. If that's how they treat you, maybe you shouldn't try anymore. I was silent for a long time, listening to her breathing on the phone, and I knew she was right. I wouldn't knock on that door again, but that rejection, that cold, closed door, suddenly pushed me towards something I'd been thinking about for a long time. I had $10 million in my accounts, and I was still living the same life, in a rented apartment, neat, comfortable, but not my own, and suddenly I realized, it's time. It's time to build something that will belong only to me. I realized I no longer wanted to live like a guest in my own destiny. I'd been hiding behind other people's expectations for too long, always temporarily renting apartments, as if I were still waiting for approval that would never come. That night, when my mother slammed the door in my face, something inside me clicked, quietly, but irreversibly. I decided it was time to buy a house, a real one, mine. I called the realtor the next day, my voice trembling with a strange excitement, like a child's before Christmas. I want a house with 3 bedrooms, a big yard, and a pool, I said, and lots of light. I need a house I can breathe in. Over the next weeks, she showed me options, cozy, luxurious, old-fashioned, sterilely new, but none of them were right, until I saw this one. The house that made a light switch turn on inside me, a modern facade, huge windows, a kitchen with marble countertops, a spacious living room where my old piano could finally be placed, and a backyard I couldn't take my eyes off, green grass, a spacious terrace, and a sparkling pool, like a piece of sky fallen to earth. The price was impressive, $850,000, but I offered the entire amount in cash, no haggling, no hesitation. The seller agreed immediately, and 3 weeks later the deal was closed, and so I became a homeowner. Moving day was like the beginning of a new chapter. I woke up early, inhaling the smell of fresh paint and cardboard, and couldn't stop smiling. I'd spent years collecting furniture, paintings, lamps, everything that reflected pieces of myself, and now, finally, I had a place where it could all come to life. When the last boxes were unpacked and the sun streamed through the windows, I stepped back a few steps and simply gazed. The house looked stunning, warm, full of life, as if it had been waiting just for me. I called Aunt Linda, as always, the first one I wanted to share the good news with. "Auntie, I bought a house," I said, my voice shaking with joy. "Caroline, darling, this is absolutely wonderful," she exclaimed. "I'm so proud of you." "Thank you," I smiled. "I think I'll throw a housewarming party. Would you like to come see?" "I'd love to," she answered without hesitation. "Can I tell the other relatives? They're interested in what you've accomplished, after all." "Of course, just please don't invite Mom, Dad, Marcus, and Diana. I don't want them there." We scheduled the party for 4 months, exactly how long it had been since I stood at their door with a bouquet. Now I was about to open the door to my own home, but only to those who wanted to enter with kindness. I invited friends from work, a few classmates, and told my aunt that she could bring anyone she wanted, as long as they were people I was truly happy to see. The day of the party arrived. The house had been buzzing since morning, smells, music, the clinking of glasses, laughter, bustle. There was a surprising sense of completeness. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel out of place. On the contrary, I was the hostess, with everything in its place, home, life, and inner peace. People admired the rooms, the photographs on the walls, the flowers by the pool. My cousins came, the same ones who had also received a share of Grandma's inheritance. "Caroline, this place is absolutely incredible," Jake said, shaking his head. "I didn't even know you were doing so well." I smiled, pouring him more wine. "Thank you, Jake, I've worked hard, and good luck with your investments," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. Then Sarah, my cousin, came up to me and said quietly, "Can I ask you something, but don't be offended?" "Sure," I replied. She hesitated, then exhaled. "Our parents always said you had a drinking and gambling problem. That's why the family stopped talking to you. That's not true, is it?" I almost choked. "What?" "Yes," she nodded. "They'd been saying that for years. They said you lost everything, that you couldn't be trusted." I looked at her, not believing what I was hearing. Mom and Dad, they didn't just disown me. They made up a monstrous lie about me to justify themselves. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sarah," I said, "do I look like someone with a drinking and gambling problem?" She glanced around at my house, my well-kept garden, me in a dress I bought not for status, but simply because I could afford it. No, she answered quietly, you definitely don't, so what happened? I sighed, it's complicated, let's just say we had a fight about money, and that's it. I didn't want to dredge up the past, not here, not tonight, so I simply smiled, sipped my champagne, and went to join the guests. The party had been wonderful, music, laughter, the aroma of food, sincere words, people who truly cared about me filled the house with the warmth I'd been missing all these years. When the guests began to leave, I went out into the courtyard, where the pool gently tumbled, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like it had all been worth it. I stood barefoot on the stone tiles, listened to the cicadas, and thought how good it was that I hadn't given up. I hadn't been part of their family for 10 years, but now I had a different one, made up of friends, kindness, hard work, and the inner strength that perhaps my grandmother had once given me along with those $50,000. And suddenly, amid the laughter and music, there was a loud, sharp knock on the door, so insistent that even conversations instantly died down, as if someone had turned the sound off. I froze for a moment, the glass of champagne trembling in my hand, and then I slowly walked toward the entrance, feeling a cold wave of foreboding rising somewhere beneath my chest. I opened the door, and time seemed to stand still. There they stood, Mom, Dad, Marcus, and Diana, all four of them. Scowling, tense, as if carved from stone, their faces were contorted with anger, their eyes flashing. What the hell does this mean? Mom shouted, and before I could say anything, she pushed me aside with her shoulder and practically barged in. Why didn't you invite us to the housewarming? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice even, because, Mom, I said quietly but firmly, you didn't even let me in the house on Mother's Day, you slammed the door right in my face, remember? Dad, standing at the threshold, looked around my house as if he'd entered enemy territory. His gaze darted from the walls, to the paintings, to the shiny floor, and in his eyes there wasn't admiration, but a malicious, icy distrust. How did you even allow yourself to live in this place? He asked, his voice accusing, as if I'd committed a crime. It's none of your business, Dad, I replied, meeting his gaze, absolutely none of your business. But Mom wasn't listening anymore, her face was flushed, her lips trembling with rage. You lied to us, she screamed, so loudly that even the music from the speakers faded. All these years you've been pretending to be poor, acting miserable, but it turns out you live like a queen. Only successful people can afford houses like this. A murmur swept through the room, and I felt the guests' gazes fall on us, the entire party, all my happiness, all the light I'd painstakingly built. It all instantly turned into a public trial. I clenched my fists, trying to speak calmly. The size of my bank account is none of your business, Mom, I want you to leave, now. But of course she didn't leave. She saw Jake and Sarah standing at the bar and rushed toward them. You need to talk some sense into her, she said, pointing a trembling finger at me. Caroline ran away from home, cut off all ties with us for no reason. She's acting ridiculous, you can tell there's something wrong with her. My cousins exchanged glances, confused and embarrassed. They didn't know where to look, who to believe, and I could see how uncomfortable they were. Jake opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't. I'm asking you to leave my house again, I said louder, so everyone could hear. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll call the police. Silence fell, thick as the viscous air before a thunderstorm. Then Dad spun around, grabbed Mom by the elbow, and muttered, let's go, we have no business here. They left, slamming the door. The music resumed behind them, but it seemed a little out of tune. I straightened up, took a deep breath, and, forcing a smile, turned to the guests. Sorry for this little family drama, I said cheerfully, let's get the party back on track. Most of them laughed, some even applauded, trying to lighten the mood, and soon the conversation and laughter returned, but I felt that some of my relatives were looking at me differently now, with questions that hung between us like shadows. I didn't want to see them, didn't want to explain anything. I simply poured wine for the guests, smiled, made toasts, and forced myself to be the hostess everyone admired. Later, when the last guest had left and the house was empty, I sat on the sofa in my luxurious living room. The silence was deafening, only the clock on the wall gently counted down the seconds. I sat, looking at the reflection of my face in the window glass, and thought about what had just happened. my parents for 10 years they told everyone that I was an alcoholic, that I spent money at the casino, that I was a disgrace to the family. They made a bogeyman out of me to justify their own cruelty, to make their lies seem respectable. But as soon as they saw this house, these walls, this shine, they suddenly decided they could return as if nothing had happened. No, not out of love, not out of regret. As always, it all came down to money, their desire to take without giving anything in return. The next morning, my phone rang nonstop. They kept calling, Mom, Diana, Marcus. I didn't answer, just watched the screen flash, the names flickering, making my stomach clench. Then the messages started coming. We know you're a successful investor now, Mom wrote. You should share your money with your family. Diana wrote, I have a mortgage, and I'm struggling to pay it. You have to help. And from Marcus came a short message, my car is falling apart, and my wife is pregnant. I need a new one, help. I read these words, one after another, and with each message, my sense of disgust and weariness grew stronger. After 10 years of silence, insults, and exile, they only returned when they smelled money. I slowly placed my phone on the table, took a deep breath, and, without answering a single message, opened the settings and blocked them all. One by one, forever. A week later, Aunt Linda called. Her voice was quiet, cautious, as if she were afraid to disturb something fragile. Caroline, dear, your parents have been calling me non-stop. They're trying to get you to talk to them. I put down my coffee cup and clutched the phone tighter. And what did you tell them, Aunt Linda? She sighed softly. I told them they had a chance when you showed up for Mother's Day with flowers. They ruined it all themselves. And I added that I think they only became interested in you after they found out you were now a wealthy woman. I couldn't help but smile through my bitterness. You're absolutely right, Auntie. And you know what, dear, she said, her voice warmer, I'm proud of you, proud that you didn't give in to them. You deserve better than constant humiliation. After that conversation, I felt a little better. I thought I'd put an end to it. I blocked their numbers, deleted them from my contacts, and, I thought, from my life. But I was wrong, they weren't going to give in. A couple of weeks passed. I was returning home from work, tired, dreaming only of peace and quiet. But as I turned onto my street, I immediately spotted a familiar car, an old sedan with a dent in the door, the kind I remembered from school. It was parked right outside my house. My heart sank. Mom and Dad were inside. They were waiting for me. I parked the car in the driveway, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a few seconds, gathering my courage. Then I got out. They immediately got out of their car. Caroline, we need to talk, Dad said, taking a step toward me. No, I replied coldly, we have nothing to talk about. I blocked your numbers for a reason. Darling, Mom interjected, trying to speak gently, we're family, we can work this out. I chuckled, we stopped being a family 10 years ago, Mom, when you kicked me out of the house just because I refused to give Diana my inheritance money. Dad frowned, trying to find the right words. That was a long time ago, he said, we all said things we didn't mean. No, I interrupted, you meant every word, and the only reason you're here now is because you found out I'm rich. The false kindness instantly vanished from Mom's face, her lips pressed into a thin line. So what if that's true? She spat, you're supposed to help your family, that's what family does. Family, I repeated slowly, supports people when they're in trouble. Where were you when I needed help? Where were you when I stood on your doorstep with flowers on Mother's Day? They were silent. I saw a shadow of shame flicker in Dad's eyes, but Mom just stood there, her hands clenched into fists. Go away, I said quietly but firmly, get off my property, or I'll call the police. They exchanged glances, then reluctantly returned to their car, but I knew it wasn't over. Indeed, a week later, they showed up at my work. It was late afternoon, and I was leaving the parking lot when I heard a voice. Caroline, wait. It was Marcus. I turned around and saw them all, Mom, Dad, Marcus, Diana, walking toward me like some kind of sinister delegation. Are you kidding? I said, this is starting to sound like harassment. We just want to talk, Diana said, her voice shaking. 5 minutes, Dad asked. I gave you 10 years, I replied, 10 years to talk to me. You chose silence, now it's my turn to remain silent. Mom stepped forward, we made a mistake, she said with the same expression she once used when she apologized to her neighbors for breaking a window. "We're sorry. What exactly are you sorry for?" I asked. "For kicking me out? For ignoring me for 10 years? For spreading rumors that I was an alcoholic and a gambler? Or simply for finding out I was rich?" The four of them fell silent. They stood there, unsure what to do with their hands. I felt a weariness rising within me, thick, sticky, heavier than anger. Dad cleared his throat. "We heard about your investments. You did a great job," he said, as if it were a compliment that should erase everything. "Thank you," I replied shortly, "but I don't need your approval." Marcus stepped closer. "Look. I know things were wrong before," he said, looking me straight in the eye, "but we're family. Families forgive each other. Families help each other in difficult times. We can start over." "Families," I interrupted, "don't make up nasty stories to shame a loved one. They don't kick a child out of the house. They only stay home when money is at stake." "Please, Caroline," Diana said quietly. I noticed her lips trembling, and it seemed she was trying to hold back tears. "I'm really having trouble with my mortgage. If you could just help me a little." And there it was, the real reason this whole procession came to the parking lot. I laughed, but it was bitter. "Let me get this straight. You didn't invite me to the wedding because I refused to give you the money. You ignored me for 10 years. You told people I was a drunk and a gambler, but now you want me to help you pay off the mortgage?" "I was young," Diana muttered. "I was stupid." "No," I answered calmly, "you were just being yourself, and you're still the same. The only difference is that now you're in debt." I took my keys out of my bag and headed for my car. "If you don't leave me alone, I'll sue and get a restraining order. That's stalking, and I won't let you ruin my life again." This time they pulled back. Mom tried to say something, but the words caught in her throat. Dad looked down. I got into the car, closed the door, turned the ignition, and, looking through the windshield, saw them standing there, four strangers I once called family. And, perhaps for the first time in all these years, they seemed to understand that they had lost me completely. They stopped showing up at my house, and it was as if they had suddenly vanished. No calls, no letters, no third-party messages. It seemed like it was all finally over, but inside, a mark remained, like a burn, invisible from the outside, but which still stung from time to time, especially at night, when the silence was too thick and my thoughts too loud. All that old pain, anger, humiliation, everything I'd tried to forget, surfaced again, and it took me several weeks to even begin to breathe calmly, not expecting to see their car around the corner again. However, life, strangely enough, went on as usual, and if you put aside the family nightmare, it was actually going quite well for me. My investment portfolio was growing steadily, deals were coming one after another, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had solid ground beneath my feet. Moreover, a man had entered my life who seemed to bring with him something surprisingly quiet and genuine. His name was Alex. We met through mutual friends, at one of those evenings where I almost refused to go, deciding I had no time for other people's smiles and conversations, and then he came over, smiled simply, without falsehood, and we started talking. Alex was a software engineer, calm, reasonable, with that special sense of humor that never came off as rude. With him, I didn't need to explain why I didn't like talking about my family, but when I finally decided to tell them about the fight, the inheritance, the 10 years of silence, the lies they spread about me, he just listened without interrupting, and then said quietly, but with a firmness impossible to miss, "Caroline, you don't owe them anything. Just because someone is related to you doesn't give them the right to ruin your life and then expect you to come to their aid." I was silent for a long moment, and then laughed through the lump in my throat. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm too cruel to them," I admitted. "No," Alex replied, looking me straight in the eye, "you were kicked out of the family for money. They kept silent for 10 years when you needed at least a word of support. They lied about you to justify their own cruelty, and now they're only coming back because they found out you're successful. This isn't family, Caroline. These are just toxic people, and you're protecting yourself." He was right. I'd built a life without them, a good one, too, and I wasn't about to let anyone ruin it again. Gradually, I began to open up to the world, letting joy, laughter, and friends into the house. I started throwing parties, loud barbecues by the pool, smelling of smoke and popcorn, or cozy dinner parties in the dining room, where the people I now called my family gathered around the long oak table. Aunt Linda was always the first to arrive, with homemade pie and her eternal jokes about age. She brought cousins, neighbors, the house filled with voices, and each time I found myself feeling truly at home for the first time in years. During one of these gatherings, my cousin Jake, tall, with a perpetual smile and a straightforwardness that always bordered on tactlessness, approached me after the others had already sat down with desserts. "Caroline," he said, lowering his voice, "can I ask you something? What really happened to your parents?" Because the story they told everyone, about the drinking, about the gambling, well, it doesn't ring true. I took a deep breath. I'd avoided this topic for a long time, trying not to touch on old wounds, but looking into Jake's honest eyes, I knew it was time. "Okay," I said, "listen, it all started with the inheritance. When my grandmother died, she left me money, not much, but enough to start a life. My parents demanded that I give it all to Diana. I refused, then they declared me a traitor, that I was greedy, and kicked me out. From then on, I didn't exist for them." Jake swore quietly, looking at the floor. "Sarah said that's why they disowned you." "Yes," I replied, "and now, after 10 years of silence, they only remembered me because they found out I invested that money wisely." "It's terrible," he said, shaking his head. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that." I smiled, no longer bitterly. "It's okay, honestly, I'm better off without them now." And it was true. My home was cozy, bright, full of warmth, my career was flourishing, Alex became my quiet rock, and around me were people who truly cared about me, not for money, not out of a sense of duty, but simply because they loved me. A few months later, Aunt Linda called. I was baking an apple pie when I heard her voice. "Caroline," she said with a peculiar intonation, "your parents are asking everyone for your new phone number again." "What did you tell them?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "I said I wouldn't give it to them," she replied firmly. I smiled and brushed flour from my palm. "Okay, I hope they got the hint." "I think so," Aunt Linda said. "I haven't heard from them in weeks." "How are they doing?" I asked, more out of politeness. "Financially, I mean, are they in trouble, perhaps?" "No," she answered without hesitation. "Your father still works, they have a house, they're not doing badly, they're just greedy." I froze, listening to the pie crackle in the oven, and suddenly felt a strange, deep relief. Everything fell into place. It was never about need, it was about greed, about power, about the habit of taking and giving nothing in return. And then I realized, I have nothing to feel guilty about anymore. They made their choice 10 years ago, I made mine, and, paradoxically, it was their decision to turn their back on me that allowed me to become myself, to grow, to survive, and finally to be happy. 2 years have passed, too long, yet surprisingly easy years, so calm that I sometimes caught myself thinking I was living in some new, purified world, where the air smelled of opportunity rather than fear, where mornings began with coffee rather than the anxiety of having to explain, defend, and justify myself again. These were, without a doubt, the best 2 years of my adult life, years when I finally felt truly alive, free from old chains, from those who once called themselves my family but behaved like my enemy. My investment portfolio by then had grown to a sum I'd never even dreamed of in my youth, over $15 million. Every time I opened my reports, I caught myself thinking that these weren't just numbers, they were proof that I'd persevered, that I'd made it. I also got a promotion at work. I now managed an entire team of analysts, and every day brought me satisfaction, not fatigue. Alex and I moved in together. He moved in with me, and the house filled with his books, his warm sweaters, his incredible calm. We began talking seriously about getting engaged. And one day, watching him fix a creaky kitchen cabinet door, I realized for the first time in years I wasn't afraid of the future. My heart, so long wary, finally believed that everything could be okay. The house that had once been a symbol of my independence now became a gathering place for those I truly loved. I created a small ritual there, a monthly dinner party. In the summer, barbecues by the pool with the scent of smoke, lemon, and laughter reflecting in the water. In the fall, cozy evenings with candles and hot cider. In the winter, festive gatherings, the air filled with the scent of pine, cinnamon, and something reminiscent of the home I once lacked. Aunt Linda was almost always there. With her boundless energy and her laughter, which lifted everyone's spirits, my cousins would come with their families, with their children, and I felt the house breathe, living, growing, filled with genuine warmth. They were my family now, real family, not by blood, but by choice. During one of these parties, as the sun was setting and the air was thick with the aroma of roasting meat and smoke, Jake pulled me aside. He looked a little tense. "Caroline, I need to tell you something," he said, looking at me as if he was afraid of my reaction. "What happened?" I set my glass on the terrace railing. "Your parents," he hesitated, "they asked me about your parties." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Someone they know told them you host big gatherings," he continued cautiously. "They wanted to see if I could get them an invitation." I laughed, not angrily, but somehow tiredly, bitterly. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them I have no right to invite people to your house. If they want to come, they have to ask you themselves." "And they?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. "No," he shrugged, "I think they know you'll say no." I nodded, and they would be absolutely right. After everything they'd put me through, they should have known I wouldn't open my doors to them just so they could take pictures by my pool and tell everyone how their daughter had made it. No, they were done with that, forever. Several months passed, and life went on as usual, until one evening, as I was returning from work, my phone rang. A name appeared on the screen, Aunt Linda. I immediately sensed something was wrong. Her voice, usually cheerful and melodious, now sounded worried. "Caroline," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something. Your father had a heart attack." My heart seemed to stop for a moment. I sat down on the edge of the bed. "Is he okay?" I asked after a long pause. "He's in the hospital, he's stable, not too serious," she replied, trying to sound calm. I remained silent, feeling a whirlwind of contradictions welling up inside me. Despite everything, he was still my father. "Caroline, are you there?" Linda asked. "Yes, I'm here," I replied, "thank you for telling me." "Are you going to visit him?" she asked cautiously. I sighed. Part of me said I should, the other part, the one that had spent years nursing the wounds, whispered no, I don't think so. Aunt Linda, if they wanted me to be a part of their lives, they could have called me years ago, not for money, not out of curiosity, but simply because they missed me. "I understand, dear," she replied, "I just wanted you to know." 2 days later, my phone rang again, an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't pick it up. I wanted to ignore it, but something, maybe intuition, made me answer. "Hi, Caroline," came a familiar voice I hadn't heard in over 10 years. "It's Mom." I froze. My first impulse was to hang up, but I couldn't. "What do you want?" I asked evenly. "Your father is in the hospital. I thought you should know." "Aunt Linda already told me," I answered coldly. "Aren't you going to come see him?" Her voice trembled. "He's your father." "He stopped being my father 10 years ago when he kicked me out," I said quietly but firmly. "Caroline, please, he asked about you." I closed my eyes. If he really wanted to see me, he had 10 years to call. "We've made mistakes," she whispered, "but we're family, this could be serious." "You made a choice, Mom," I replied. "And now I live with the consequences of mine, and you live with the consequences of yours." And without giving myself time to regret it, I hung up. After that call, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, unable to even put the phone down, just staring at something, feeling a tightness inside me, as if someone had pushed aside an old, scarred pain and now it was aching again. Alex came in quietly, as always, not loudly, not demandingly. He simply came up, looked at me, and immediately knew something was wrong. "Is everything okay?" he asked softly, sitting down on the chair next to me. I silently handed him the phone, as if that screen with the recent number could explain everything I was feeling. He looked at it, then at me. "They called?" he said, more affirmatively than questioningly. I nodded. "Mom, she was talking about Dad." Again, he took my hand, intertwined his fingers with mine, and that simple touch became an anchor that kept me afloat. "What do you think about this?" he asked quietly. I sighed. Part of me, the words caught in my throat, part of me thinks maybe I should visit him, but the other part knows perfectly well, they only remember me when they need something, when it suits them. "And what do you want to do?" he asked, looking straight into my eyes. calmly, without judgment. I want to protect myself, I replied, feeling the words rushing out, to protect myself from new wounds, from the same old games. They've shown time and again that they don't really want a relationship, they don't want me, they want my money, my success, the chance to show that they were right, after all, to raise me. Alex nodded. Then trust your instincts, you know they won't let you down. My father recovered from his heart attack, and life returned to normal. I didn't go to the hospital and didn't feel an ounce of guilt. I'd already realized that a relationship where love flows only in one direction isn't a family, it's a prison, and I escaped it. 6 months later, I threw the biggest party of my life, my 35th birthday. The house was ablaze with light, music was pouring from the speakers, the air was filled with the scent of flowers and wine, people were laughing, talking, hugging, and I suddenly realized that, perhaps for the first time, I was celebrating not age, but life itself. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, relatives, all those who had become part of my present, came. Aunt Linda, tireless as ever, invited several distant cousins I hadn't seen in ages. During the party, my cousin Sarah approached me with that expression that immediately tells you she knows something. "Caroline," she whispered, coming closer, "you won't believe it, Marcus just texted me." I froze. What does he want? He asked if I could take a few pictures of the party and send them to him. He said my parents wanted to see how you're doing. I chuckled. Even now, after everything, they were still keeping an eye on me, from afar, cautiously, through others, the same old, dishonest desire to peer into my life without risking meeting me face to face. "And what did you tell him?" I asked. Sarah smiled. "I said that if they were so interested, they should call you themselves." "Good answer," I said, feeling a heavy weight lift from my soul. I no longer felt anger, only a slight indifference and a strange relief. Later, when the guests had left and only Alex and I were left in the house, we cleared the dishes and laughed at how Aunt Linda had managed to get everyone dancing to an old 80s hit. Then he suddenly asked, "Do you ever regret cutting them off?" I stopped, looked at him, and was silent for a long moment. "No," I finally said, "I don't. My life has gotten better, without the constant drama, without manipulation, without pain. Now I'm surrounded by people who truly care about me, not because I owe them anything, but because I am me." "But they're still your family," Alex said quietly, as if testing my reaction. "Blood ties don't make people family," I replied. "Family isn't just DNA, it's love, support, and respect. They're the ones who celebrate your successes, who stay by your side when you're down." I gestured around the room, which still smelled of candles, wine, and warmth. "There they are, my family, the real one." It was the pure truth. Aunt Linda, my cousins, my friends, Alex, these people filled my life with meaning, laughter, and light. They were there not for profit, not for what I could give them, but simply because they loved me. My biological family made their choice 10 years ago. They decided that money was more important than relationships. I made mine, and my choice brought me peace, tranquility, and that very silence in which I can finally breathe deeply. 3 years have passed since that ill-fated housewarming, and during that time, my parents have repeatedly tried to find a way to re-enter my life. They wrote, passed on messages through friends, even sent holiday greetings, but never once did they say the simple word sorry. They never inquired about how I was doing, never asked if I was happy. They still cared only about one thing, what they could gain. And one day, I finally understood. I no longer had to suffer for defending myself, even if it meant defending myself from those who once called themselves family. I built a wonderful life, full of love, kindness, and warmth. My home rang with laughter, the scent of coffee, freshly baked goods, and peace. My career was flourishing. I had someone by my side who truly loved me, and for the first time in years, I could say, "I am happy, I am Caroline," and I was reborn.